So hello everyone, and welcome to our second virtual Let's Talk Science career panel for our volunteers. My name is Lauren Hollis, and I work on the Let's Talk Science outreach team as a program coordinator. Let's Talk Science is a national charitable organization committed to empowering and inspiring Canadian youth to develop the skills they'll need to participate and thrive in a rapidly changing world. To accomplish this, Let's Talk Science offers a suite of science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM-based programs to support educators, youth, and our volunteers across Canada. The Let's Talk Science outreach program can be found at over 40 colleges and universities across the country, connecting educators and youth with volunteers to deliver hands-on STEM-based activities. Our volunteer network also includes those who contribute to our web-based program, Curiosity. Curiosity connects youth and educators with members of the STEM community and offers an interactive space for teens to explore and really engage in issues that are relevant to them. Recently, we asked our volunteers how we could best support their professional development, and near the top of the list was career preparation. So today we have brought together 3 Let's Talk Science volunteer alumni to share their stories and career paths with us. During our time together today, we will be asking the panelists a few questions that were submitted in advance by volunteers, as well as taking live questions. If you do have a question for one or all of our panelists, please enter it into the YouTube live stream chat box, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. So I would like to welcome our panelists and say thank you for taking the time to join us today. So to get started, I'll ask each of you to tell us a bit about yourself, your background with Let's Talk Science, and the position that you are currently in. So we'll start with Dr. Bernadette Ardelli.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm currently in Brandon, Manitoba, but I'm originally from Sydney, or I guess outside of Sydney, Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. Did my undergraduate degree at the university on the island. It's now called Cape Breton University. Went to university because I wanted a job, and I was told in high school, yes, if you go to university, you will get a job. And then at the end of those 4 years, it was like, oh boy, doesn't look like I'm going to get a job with this degree. And so I ended up going on to grad school at the University of Guelph, did my master's and my PhD there. That's probably where I would say I found myself as a scientist, because I didn't have any sort of set goal. When I finished my undergrad, my goal was to work with great white sharks. And I was told, well, that's silly. No one's going to pay you to go look at them. You have to have more of a focus. And so I decided to go to grad school. And that's where I really kind of focused on what I wanted to do. Master's degree was a learning experience. That's how I looked at it. I made some mistakes for sure, and I learned from those. And it's when I went on to the PhD where I really started to focus on what I wanted to do. And that's also where I met Let's Talk Science. At that time at the University of Guelph, my supervisor at the time asked me to make a decision. Do you want to go into academia or industry or neither? And I said, well, I want to be an academic. And he said, okay, great. We will, set you on the career path for academia. But at the time, you didn't really get a lot of teaching experience. And that's really what you needed to have as well in your portfolio if you were going to go the academic route and work at a university. So I joined up with Let's Talk Science because it gave me the opportunity to actually go out and talk to people, teach them about things. And at that time, I picked what was the most dead, boring, awful topic to try and discuss with students, cellular respiration, if you're familiar with it. And then I went out to all these different high schools and I tried to talk to them, tried to make it fun. I guess that was my perspective, that it doesn't have to be this sort of boring topic that people think that it is. After finishing my doctorate, I went on to McGill University. I was a NSERC postdoctoral fellow at McGill. I was there for 6 years, arrived at Brandon in 2006, and worked my way up to professor, and I became the Dean of Science a month ago. So that's where I am at the moment, and it's a balmy minus 37. We're having a good day today.
This doesn't make minus 20 feel so bad anymore.
No.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. So next we'll have Eric Liu.
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute my microphone. Hello, everyone. My story is a little bit different in that I'm born and raised from Fort McMurray, Alberta. If any of you guys know where that community is, it's the oil sands capital of Canada, and where all the oil, like we like to say, it comes from. I had options after high school. After high school, a lot of my friends obviously stayed behind and worked in the oil patch. But I was looking for something else. So I went to university, did my undergrad at the University of Alberta, and then stayed. I was fortunate enough in that summer before university to get a chance to work in a research lab. And in my undergrad, I realized that was a lot of fun. I like science a lot. Maybe I will pursue this as a career goal. So after my undergrad, I found a position as a graduate student, still at the University of Alberta, and I worked towards a master's and then switched into my PhD. My background is in immunology, but over the course of my PhD, unlike Bernadette, I guess I fell out of love with the research side at the done in the academic way. However, I still like the idea of being involved in research. So when I was a grad student, I looked for other opportunities to reach out, and especially since my time at the university really started when, like, that summer before undergrad that I got to spend in a research lab. I only actually learned about that because someone had traveled to my high school to give a speech about working in research labs, and that you could do that through a program called Hires. That's an Alberta-based program, and only through that did I find out that I had a chance to work in research. Growing up in a small community, research was very far from the mind, right? Everyone was talking about heavy industry or local jobs. I didn't even think that was a career I could pursue. So when I was a grad student, I figured I'm going to try to do and give back to small communities around Edmonton. So I joined Let's Talk Science to get that support. And I got to travel out to a few of the smaller communities, high schools around Edmonton, but not in Edmonton. I focused more on the outside and give presentations to students and let them know what science was. Because even though I didn't really want to do and go the professor route, I knew I still really loved it. And that's where I find myself today. After graduating, I knew I wanted to be involved. I just wasn't sure how I could remain involved in science. So I found myself applying for jobs, and I got one at Mitacs. And Mitacs is an organization where I get to work with researchers across Canada, mostly at the University of Alberta, because I'm based in Edmonton, and help promote their research and connect them to industry and community partners. So that way we can build collaborations for research so we can get knowledge that's being discovered out into the hands of the people who can use it right away. It's a very rewarding job. I love what I do now. And I'm very fortunate in that my time at Let's Talk Science actually helped teach me all the skills that I would need to communicate and present science in a way that other people outside of the scientific community would appreciate and understand. And that's my introduction, I believe.
Great, thanks so much, Eric. And finally, we have Dr. Rachel Ward-Maxwell joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Lauren, and thanks to everyone at Let's Talk Science for inviting me to be part of this panel today. I'm very excited. So very similar path to Bernadette and Eric. I grew up in Pickering, Ontario, just outside of Toronto, and stuck pretty much close to home. I was always interested in science and decided that I wanted to pursue that when I was in high school. Specifically, my background is in astronomy and astrophysics. And so that particular field was a bit more of a trickier decision. Didn't really know what kind of science I wanted to pursue. And so that decision was a little bit difficult, but ultimately I ended up studying astrophysics at York University, and I did my undergraduate degree there. And it was a really wonderful experience. From the time I was in my first year, I had wonderful opportunities to participate in research projects and to work at the observatory that was on campus and get that exposure. So I really got the research bug early, but I also got the outreach bug early too. And that was through those opportunities at the York Observatory. And so that carried me forward throughout my undergrad and ultimately led to me deciding to pursue a master's degree, which I did at McMaster University. But I kept that outreach, that love and passion for science outreach going forward, and continued to work at the planetarium at McMaster University. And of course, Let's Talk Science. I started as a volunteer with Let's Talk Science in my first year of my master's. And then that really is around the time when I was doing my master's degree. I think Eric said is a good opportunity to sort of test and see if you like the research side of things. I was really interested in the work and the project that I was doing, but I was also very passionate also about communicating science to the public and teaching and doing these types of programs. And so finding that balance was really, really challenging. I ultimately decided to do my doctoral degree also at McMaster University. And it was near the end, about halfway through actually, through my PhD, that I became a site coordinator at McMaster University. And that ultimately, I think, led to my career that I have now, which is as a researcher programmer in astronomy and space sciences at the Ontario Science Centre. And what's really interesting is that I recall my supervisor asking me when I was trying to decide what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to continue in academia, or you want to pursue postdoctoral fellowship, or do you want to pursue a career outside of that? She asked me, could you see yourself doing anything other than research, other than academia? I said, yes. And she said, what could you see yourself doing? I said, I want to work at the Ontario Science Centre. And so even years and years and years before I ended up here, that was something that just because I grew up in and around Toronto, this was the place for me that I thought was sort of one of the best places I could go to really have an impact for doing science outreach and reaching a lot of people and sharing my love of astronomy specifically, which is wonderful that I get the opportunity to do that every day. And I really credit Let's Talk Science and the opportunities that I had there for guiding me to this point, and also a lot of the mentors that I had along the way as well. So although I didn't travel too far away from home, I'm pretty happy to be where I am now. Looking forward to all your questions.
Great, thank you, Rachel. So now that we've heard a bit about the background, we'll start with some of our pre-submitted questions. If anyone watching this live event does have a question for any of our panelists, please enter it into the chat box in the YouTube live stream, and we will get to that as well. So our first question is, how do you translate the skills you develop during volunteer work into deliverables and attributes that you can put on a resume or job application and make it stand out? So Bernadette, do you have any advice you can give our volunteers to this end?
Absolutely. And this is a perfect timing for that question, because I just came from a meeting where we're trying to shortlist somebody for a job. And so, we're combing through these resumes and we're picking them apart. So I guess I would say that you want to be brief but informative. And you have to look at, well, what the job is that you're applying for. So, in terms of, if you're talking about volunteer work through Let's Talk Science, maybe everything that you've done isn't necessarily applicable to that job. So that would be probably my biggest thing, is to make sure it's actually appropriate for the job itself, what you're putting on that resume, so or job application. So again, if the job is about, for example, being able to engage large groups of students, well, this is where you would want to indicate some of that experience that you have in engaging those students. And you can, again, you don't have to put everything, but you can, briefly highlight some of those instances where you perhaps engage this larger group of students. And again, with the resume or job application, you want to put enough information so they can get an idea of your skills. And then, because the goal is, again, to get the interview, and at the interview, this is where you can expand on all of these other things. So again, brief but informative, and make sure that it speaks to the job that you're applying for.
Great, thank you very much, Bernadette. Next question, what pushed you to look outside the standard academia and industry? So Eric, what led you to Mitacs?
Well, like I kind of said in my opening preamble, I was looking outside of academia already, outside the standard academia. What I assume standard industry in my sense would have been immunology if I would have continued doing research in industry. That was always an option. However, that was something I wasn't too interested in, knowing what we know about pharmaceutical research in Canada. A lot of it is done in Europe and in Asia and in the US, and I have strong family ties to this area. So I wasn't in the position where I was going to want to move away. So I was kind of looking for something that appealed to me anyways. Mitacs just happened to come together all at the right time, because the position is what I was looking for, which was helping to bridge academics and industrial research to help build bridges for the community, in the ultimate benefit of researchers in general, because then we can apply research to community needs and industry needs and help students get that exposure out there. But really, what skill that I wish I had, the question, sorry, again, was what prompted me to look outside?
Yeah, so what pushed you to look outside the standard academia or industry?
Yeah, it was family, a combination of factors, social, knowing the economy in the area, but then personal choice too. Obviously, I could have kept doing a postdoc in the lab I was in, look for another postdoc, but then the opportunity at Mitacs came along, so I went with that instead. And I really viewed it as sort of a business development type postdoctoral fellowship. Really, it's just to get different kinds of training out there in a kind of stepping outside.
Great, thank you, Eric. So our next question for all of our panelists is, what is a skill that you wish you had practiced more before entering the workforce? So we'll start with Rachel.
All right. I would say that two things. One thing would be, they're kind of linked. One would be delegation of tasks and also working collaboratively. I find that in academia, you're so focused on your research project that you can become very isolating. And it's also a very, very specific niche field of, or niche question or niche field of your of study. So thinking about things more broadly, more big picture, and having opportunities practicing, whether it's through programs like Let's Talk Science or other groups, working together in teams on projects and allowing others to, or asking others, welcoming that help, learning to ask for help. I think that's something that when you're working on your own research project, you speak and connect with your supervisors, but you're largely on your own for a lot of the time. And even as a coordinator, there were two of us who were site coordinators together, and that was a great team to work on projects with development of programs for Let's Talk Science. But I found when I came here, even by comparison, so for Let's Talk Science, like, we're developing the kits and we're training the volunteers and we're booking the spaces and all those things, and to come to a place where there are other people who can help, it's nice, and it took some getting used to realize that, you know, learn to ask for help and know that you're not alone and you don't have to do everything by yourself. People are there to support you.
That's great. Thanks, Rachel. And Bernadette, is there a skill you wish you would practice more before entering the workforce?
I'm not sure if I would call it a skill, but maybe a lesson that I could have learned that would have been helpful. The field that I do my research in is really competitive. And so I always worked in a lab with somebody who was, you know, a really big name in their field. And so with that came a lot of competition. So by the time I started my position here, one of the things that there was this expectation, you have to be able to develop your own ideas. And I'd spent so much time working on their ideas and pushing their ideas forward that I never really kind of had a chance to take a breath and say, well, what are my ideas? Like, where do I want to go? What is my identity? So I wished I had taken the time to kind of, I mean, I was interested in everything that I did, but I needed to be able to separate myself from who they were. And so that was something that I had to really work on. The second thing would be balance. Finding a balance in my life, because for so long, when you're, again, trying to build this career in this competitive environment in academia, you know, it gets harder and harder to find positions in academia. You just become so job focused, so career focused, you kind of forget all the other things. And so I used to kind of look at vacations, I used to call them my obligation. But now I have that balance. I don't view it as it's a vacation. So being able to find time to make your career, but understanding that it's okay to have time for yourself. And in fact, I think it's important to have that balance, because you'll end up in a very unhealthy situation.
That's great advice. And Eric, is there a skill you wish you had practiced more before entering the workforce?
Yeah. Persuasion and salesmanship is something I wish I would have worked on more. As a grad student, and even at Let's Talk Science, you just get caught up in the research and promoting the science. But the salesmanship side of it, and trying to persuade people that what your solution is a good solution and something that will help solve their problems, is something I wish I practiced more before I had started, because I find myself having to do that almost every day now. Part of my role is bridging two communities together who don't historically communicate that well, industry and academia. Yet each of those communities have something to offer the other one. And being able to put myself in the other side's shoes, especially putting myself in the side of industry and trying to predict or understand where they're coming from and why they think a certain way. That's a skill I've developed over time, and it helps me do my job better. But even if you decide to go into the research world and do research, it will also serve you, knowing if you can understand where the other person is coming from. Because if you can understand, you can tailor your solutions or your answers to solve their problem. And when you can do that, that will open doors in any field, whether it's research or business or science communication, because then now you know why they've come to you.
Great, thank you, Eric. And we have a question from the live stream chat. So for all our panelists, where do you see your career going in the next 10 to 20 years? So Bernadette, please.
Sure, I actually got asked that question for my job interview when I became the Dean of Science, and I had a answer ready because I knew exactly why I wanted to be the Dean of Science. So my research is on drug resistance in pathogenic microorganisms, but everything I work on is basically diseases of poor and marginalized populations. And so I spend my life in the lab. I've been a bit of a lab rat, so to speak. I have students who are working in the lab, and I feel like we have answers, and I want to try and put those answers into practice. And so in terms of being the Dean of Science, I did it to get the administrative experience because I need that in order to go to the next step in my career, which is to work for a much larger organization like World Health Organization, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I've had funding from them over the years because I want to be able to work more globally and put my ideas into practice, because I think I have the solution. Because right now it's just, well, I can generate more and more papers, but I actually want to be able to make a difference. And so to get a job like that, and I see it in my twilight years, so to speak, you need to have some administrative experience. You need to be able to show that you've been able to manage these projects and large groups of people and be able to bring them together. So that's where I see myself, probably more in, let's say, 15 years.
Well, that sounds great. That sounds like a very exciting career path. And Eric, where do you see your career going in the next 10 to 20 years?
Like Bernadette just mentioned, one of the aspects of my role right now, and which I wish I had more of, would be managing people, being an administrator. Because right now I'm on the delivery side at Mitacs, so I'd really like to get into the managing aspect, trying to work with a team and then to manage those people. Because from there, if I can get that experience, I'd love to move into a more programmatic role, overseeing the creation of new linkages between academia and industry, helping create new programs or helping create new initiatives that put people together. Sitting on that more programmatic level rather than right now I'm on the delivery side is something I really like to get into. And avenues where that will lead me is either working for the Alberta government in the ministry, maybe moving that way, or have aspirations moving into the federal government side, into their science and innovation portfolio. Either of those options, but I don't like to limit myself saying that that's my trajectory. I've gotten this far with the opportunities that come along, so I'm always keeping one eye open to opportunities to advance. But that's where I see myself wanting to go. Still impacting research and impacting students is where I want to be.
That sounds great. Thanks, Eric. And Rachel, where do you see your career going in the next 10 to 20 years?
I feel like it's kind of cliche, but I kind of have my dream job. So whenever I've gotten asked this question before, and it's kind of hard for me to envision myself doing anything else because I always envision myself getting to this point. So thinking about what's next is something that I've just started thinking about. I completed my PhD in 2015. And I mentioned that I did a lot of outreach throughout my undergraduate and graduate degrees, but near the end of my doctoral degree, I started hosting at the Ontario Science Centre. So I was on the delivery side of the programs. And then very, very quickly, I was hired to become a researcher programmer. So I helped to develop the planetarium shows and produce science content and programs for related temporary exhibitions and space-related programs. So it's so varied. Every single day is different. And we're also coming up to the 50th anniversary of the Ontario Science Centre next year. So we're having this a lot of conversation and discussion of where the Science Center is going to go and what's planned for the next 50 years. And so in my role that I have now, it's already incredibly exciting, all the different things that I see on the horizon that I'm going to get to the chance to do. So thinking about moving out of this role, whereas to something maybe a more senior role would be exciting. I also feel like I haven't gotten everything I want to out of this position yet. So I'm really quite happy staying where I am for the next 10 years, and then ask me maybe in 10 years. Maybe I'll have a plan by then.
No, that sounds wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. So our next question for all of our panelists is, if you're not exactly sure what you want to do, but want to use your scientific knowledge, when looking for a job/career, what kind of search terms would you use? So Bernadette, do you have any advice for this question?
Sure. I'm not sure what stage of their career that the person asking the question is at, but for me, over the years, the first distinction I would make is between job and career. I kind of view them differently, because when I started university, I wanted a job because, you know, the part of the country I come from, it's very hard to find a job. And so I was thinking along the lines of, well, you know, money in my pocket, food on the table, and I'll worry about the next job after that. So for me, job is very short term, career is a very long term strategy. So you might have to do a lot of jobs, so to speak, before you get yourself into that career. So from my perspective, whenever I was looking for a job or looking for a career, I mean, at least in my field, we look for skills. So what kind of skills do you have? So if you're looking for like a research job where you're working in a lab, you should search for what skills you have. So if you could say you have skills in, say, DNA technology or bioinformatics, if those are your skills, then that's what I would use for the search, because you're not going to get a job in an area where you don't have the skills, because you have to be able to back it up. So if there is a job in bioinformatics, but you don't have that skill, so that's what I would say. Search for terms that you actually have a skill. You can say that I'm skilled at doing this.
That's really great advice, Bernadette. Thank you. And Eric, do you have anything to add when you're looking for a job and you're not sure what you want to do, but know you want to use your scientific knowledge? What search terms would you use during a job search?
Right. I'm assuming this is a job search on a website such as like Monster.ca or Indeed. But interesting search terms that I just might use is just research, and just create a daily memo for research and just see what kind of jobs out there would actually reference a research role. Maybe put science or evaluation or monitoring. Those are all jobs, less careers, but more jobs that would look for someone with a science background to do those types of work out there. And some of those jobs that pop up might be really obscure, and you're like, wow, I didn't even know. So even as a grad student, I would almost set that up in your mailbox just so that you can see what types of jobs keep popping up. And those are skills. And like Bernadette said, then you can work towards developing the skills while you're still a student to maybe answer those job ads when the time comes. But like Bernadette said, career is the long strategy. That's what you're working towards. And for the case of Rachel, it sounds like she's found her career because she's interested in what she's doing, and her job is her career. And I would actually echo the same thing for myself. Job is almost career for where I am. But getting to here, there's a lot of odd jobs that I did to build up my skills too, right? So yeah, so search terms in science, just search science, research, monitoring, evaluation, those types of things. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Eric. And finally, Rachel, do you have anything to add to this topic of conversation?
Yeah, specifically for if you're interested in the science communication and outreach side of things, certainly science communication, but also knowledge translation. A lot of opportunities for technical writing or science writing, where you're actually taking your scientific knowledge and translating it, translating text for the general public. That's an opportunity. So knowledge translation is a phrase that can be used similarly to science communication and outreach. So that would be something that I would flag as well. If you like the teaching side of things, so teaching, education, I would echo Eric's point of using research, because research can be very, very broad. It can be an academic researcher, it can be a researcher in industry or in lots of different positions, research scientists, data scientists. So if you have like computer programming or that kind of background, things like big data, AI, machine learning, those are all really big right now and have a lot of applications and opportunities in industry.
That's great. Thanks, Rachel. So we have a question for Bernadette. In your role as a site supervisor for the outreach program at Brandon University, what skills do you see volunteers develop throughout their time as a volunteer?
We're relatively new. We've only been sort of up and running since September officially. But, because we're a very small university, I know pretty well everyone who is a volunteer in this program, so I can kind of see firsthand how they're developing. So organization is a big one that I see, because again, if you're, because of our geographic location, most of our outreach activities involve some kind of travel. We just can't hop on a bus and go to where we want to go. So they have to think about, the time it's going to take to get there. Do they have everything they need before they go? Because if their activity is a 2-hour drive away in a small town, if you forgot something, you just can't run to Walmart and pick it up kind of thing, because it's just not an option. So so they have to be very, very organized. I would say also flexible, because again, there could be, like today was kind of busy for me because an activity we were supposed to have yesterday on campus got canceled because of bad weather. The highways were closed. So again, you have to be a little bit flexible in terms of, what you're doing. You might have to make some changes on the fly, so to speak. Also, communication is a big one, because you have most of our volunteers, most of them are well into their degrees, and so they're going out, and a lot of them are talking to maybe kindergarten students. And so being able to communicate what you're doing here to a level that that they can understand is a skill that they're developing as well. And also, probably the last thing is just being able to talk. We have so many people who are just shy, reserved, reluctant to just get out there and talk, but also perhaps a little bit reluctant to show their passion for the science and the subject material. But I actually see that that's developing in them as well, because they'll come back, oh, that class was so excited about my research on the lady beetles, and they were really excited. And so it's nice to see that with them. So that's what I see.
Great, thanks, Bernadette. So we have a question from the live stream for Eric and for Rachel. Was getting a PhD necessary for your career path? So Rachel.
For the position that I have now, I would say it was not necessarily, I wouldn't say that it isn't necessary, but it certainly was a benefit and certainly was an advantage, I think. And when I look around the Science Center, most of the scientists that we have on staff here do have advanced degrees. It gives a certain I can't think of the word that I'm using right now, but whereas it's not necessarily required, I would say it was an advantage, and not just in getting the job per se, but just for myself and my own personal growth and being at the right place at the right time to be in this role. I think I learned a lot during my master's and my PhD, and a lot of those skills were transferable to the work that I'm doing now, and not just in outreach, in research and in teaching as well. And I think I remember when I first started, it was a big question that I had, and then a lot of my friends and colleagues had, about going through graduate school, and is this going to set me back if I decide I don't want to pursue this career anymore? If I want to change, am I going to be seen as overqualified? I haven't really noticed that. I have a lot of friends who've left academia who are now in industry, and it's definitely seen as a benefit to have. And it's not necessarily seen as an overqualification. And because so many people are now moving into industry, and so many of the skills that you're learning in your master's and PhD are transferable. We talked about that earlier, about emphasizing how your skills are transferable. As long as you can communicate that well in your job applications, and your cover letter especially is a great tool for communicating why you'd be a right fit. Bernadette mentioned really look at the job ad and try and reflect what's described in the job ad. Then it doesn't really matter necessarily if you have a master's and PhD and then leave. It wouldn't be seen as a detractor. I think it would be seen as a positive thing, and open up more doors to you. So I would definitely encourage people, if they feel that it's a path that they're considering, to not close that door because they feel like maybe they'll lose out on something else.
That's some great advice. And Eric, did you find having a PhD was necessary for your career path?
To echo Rachel's point, in my career path, it's not necessary, but highly desired. Getting a PhD is a very personal choice. When I think about it, it's not for everyone, and for those who want to do it, kudos to you. For me, it was like not everyone climbs Mount Everest, but yet there are people who do. PhD in academic terms and education terms and you can do it like in Everest. This is the mountain you decided to climb, and it's something that sets yourself apart from other people. The negative connotations that I can see the question referring to in the terms of like, oh, are you then overqualified for certain jobs? I heard it best from another presenter I saw recently, and the question there is, it really touches on an underlying statement, is if you're overqualified for that job and they think you're overqualified for it, maybe you would have found that job very boring as well and not challenging. So they probably saved you from not doing a job that was going to be tedious and boring. Now, the thing there is that you need to be able to build those connections to people while you're still in school, so that you can find that next job afterwards with people who would appreciate what you've gone through and have, right? And a PhD in my field does open doors. It does open doors in the sense that when I meet with researchers, when I meet with companies in my role in business development, I meet with technical people, and they will tell you, they tell me that like, oh, you're one of the first people I've met that works for a pseudo-government organization or something like that seems to understand our technology, seems to understand where we're coming from and our research need. And it's like, well, is it because I have a PhD, or is it because I've taken the time to understand and be open to learn new things? And when you get down to it, science is science, and you can understand how and what the problem is, no matter what the field. You just won't know it as intimately, but you will understand science. So that has helped. When there's a lot of people out there helping to try to pitch research partnerships, yet they don't themselves understand the research or know what the benefit is, even to the company. So it does help, but you don't need it, but it helps. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Eric. So we have a question from the live chat for Rachel. Do you have any recommendations of short-term jobs to seek to gain additional skills once I'm done my PhD, if my goal is to get a similar position as yours?
Well, I would definitely recommend actually looking into some of the Mitacs courses, because that was something that I did in my last year. I took the project management courses in Mitacs, and I found that those were really interesting and helpful. So that's a course, but also something that's a great opportunity to take advantage of those while you're still in grad school or university, to take advantage of those opportunities to build your skills outside of the research project that you're working on. In terms of short-term jobs, I mentioned that I started here as a host, and so there's lots of part-time jobs that are usually posted on the Science Center's website, and that's kind of how I found that position, and I applied, and I'm very fortunate to get it. And I saw it as an opportunity. It was part-time, it was a chance to get a foot in the door, because I knew this is sort of where I wanted to end up, and I was willing to apply for lots of different types of positions here. Actually, years ago, I was a volunteer with the rec programs department here at the Science Center, which runs the sleepovers. So there's sometimes volunteer positions, but you don't even just have to look at the Science Center. Lots of museums have similar types of positions, facilitators, and there's lots of outreach programs that you can look into. I applied for several positions before I got this job, all looking at different museum websites and looking at different community centers, just opportunities to do project management, program development. I wasn't even necessarily looking for science even at the beginning, because I wanted to build my skills outside of that, because I felt like my science knowledge was already quite strong, and so building on those other tools. So looking for, I would encourage you to volunteer. Let's Talk Science hires quite frequently, so you could check out the careers page on their website, and contract positions or part-time positions, lots of great opportunities to get your foot in the door. I'd also recommend, if you're considering any kind of postgraduate program, to look into, there's a science communication master's program and certificate program at Laurentian University. That was going to be the direction that I was going to take if I wasn't able to get a position right away. I was going to consider either going to do a certificate program, more formal training in science communication, and also Seneca College has a summer institute on science communication that they offer now. It's really grown in the past few years. There's more and more opportunities for science communication and outreach than there were when I first started. And so I think that just start looking and seeing if you can find some of those opportunities, because they're out there. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Rachel. I think we'll have time for about one more question. So we have one for Bernadette. Just wondering if you could expand a little on how you developed the skills to approach people. I would definitely consider myself more of an introvert, and this is something I struggle with.
Okay, well, that's my response was, I can attempt to answer this question, but perhaps give some advice. I was actually a very shy and reserved person until, well, I guess necessity is the mother of invention, that expression. When I left home and went to the University of Guelph, I knew nobody. I had no family connection. I just went, I was plunked into this big university, and I had to try and well, I needed to make connections. I had to find out, well, where the classroom was, where my lab was, all sorts of things. So I would suggest, if you're trying to, to develop the skills to approach people, I would say start by getting involved in something that's within your comfort zone. So maybe you're an introvert, but you really like, I don't know, badminton. I'm thinking of that because I actually had a student in my lab who was such an introvert, and he really wanted to go into medicine. And I'm like, you're not going to pass that interview. You're just going to be, you have to get out of this comfort zone. So I said, well, what are some things that you like to do? So with badminton, there was a club. And so he went to the club, and it started with just, having one-on-one, and then a team. And then he slowly kind of expanded beyond his comfort zone a little bit at a time, until you don't even really notice it after a while. So that's what I would suggest, is just start with something that you really like, so that you can actually talk about it. Like, don't throw yourself into a situation where you know nothing about it, because it's not going to help you connect with people. So that would be my advice.
Great. And Eric, you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit. Students routinely come to my office and ask about how do I network with certain people. And a shameless plug, but the Mitacs networking workshop is a great resource. And only because I say that is I took that workshop when I was a grad student. And the crazy thing is, now that I work for Mitacs, I use the skills I learned in that workshop almost every day when I go to a networking event. I myself may seem like an extrovert, kind of have to be an extrovert for this job, but I'm kind of on the middle. I'm not a total extrovert. I'm kind of an introvert too. I like being quiet and not meeting people if I don't have to. So some of those skills you learn in there are great. And if you find just like any skill, for introverts or extroverts, the only way to get better at it is practice. And like Bernadette said, find avenues that make you comfortable and practice it. Just practice speaking to someone, doing a sport, getting to know people. People are not that different in different social situations. They're the same. They want to talk about themselves. So go up to them and let them talk about themselves, and you have just started a conversation. So that is my advice. Just get out there and ask them to talk about themselves, and they will. And now you stepped out and started making connections.
Great. Thank you, Eric. So we have a question here for all of our panelists. What was your favorite activity to do when you were a Let's Talk Science volunteer? So Rachel, do you have a favorite activity?
Oh, there's so many. We had a great program at McMaster when I was there, where we had fish tanks in classrooms where kids were raising Atlantic salmon. And that was always a great program, a great treat, getting the salmon eggs and depositing them and watching the fish grow. But I also want to mention Silly Putty, because that was one that we would, it's tried and true. We would use it over and over again, always popular. And I actually ended up bringing making Silly Putty in my host interview when I came to the Science Center. So I brought everything in the little baggies and handed them out to them, and I was like, okay, let's make some Silly Putty together. So that would go to the top. That's the one that sticks in my mind.
That's a fun one. And Bernadette, was there a favorite activity you have?
Well, we're talking over 20 years ago. I'm pretty old to this program. I think it was 1995 that I did this. But at that time, at the Guelph site, we would have people come to the aquatic sciences facility. So we would do these sort of tours with the younger kids, and just watching them and trying to pick up a starfish, and just looking at kind of the kind of creepy crawly things and watching their reaction, because we had it was almost like we had a zoo. It was the zoology department, so we kind of had our own sort of little zoo there that we could go through. But I also really liked the kind of the behind the scenes stuff. So when we got together as a group to kind of brainstorm, what can we do? You know, what sorts of things might excite students, that kind of thing. So I really liked that.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And Eric, do you have any favorite activities, outreach activities?
Yeah. My favorite one, and I still want to do it today, is the DNA extraction from a strawberry, or actually DNA extraction from your own mouth using a Q-tip and stuff like that. That one was one of my favorite ones, because I had a whole lesson plan planned out, and I would go over like the cell wall and the cell membrane, and how each of these extraction techniques aid in us getting the DNA out. It was a lot of fun. So that was one of my favorite ones. But then I think I was more the administrator, since I like time as a site coordinator. I like being in the background and helping organize things. But when talking to students, DNA extraction.
That sounds great. So as we only have a few minutes remaining, I'd like to give each of our panelists a chance to share any last piece of advice with our volunteers. So Bernadette, if you'd like to get us started with that.
A lot of the questions that we got seem to be sort of around careers, jobs, that sort of thing. So whatever you do, be passionate about it, because sometimes things might get tough. Sometimes maybe the job market wanes a little bit, but if it's what you're truly passionate about, that's what's going to help you ride the rough waves, so to speak. And keep that goal in mind. This is what I'm really passionate about. This is what I really want to do. And yeah, just keep the end goal in mind.
Thank you, Bernadette. And Eric, any last piece of advice to share with our volunteers?
No, yeah, same thing. You have to persevere. If you're not doing what you want to be doing, but because you're doing a job just to keep food on the table and a roof over your head, consider volunteering. Volunteering to do what you ultimately want to do, because every little step you take will get you towards that dream job, or what you would consider a career job. So always keep your mind open, keep your eyes open, because that opportunity is on the corner. And I guess it wasn't really said, but right after I graduated from my PhD, I didn't get my job at Mitacs right away. It wasn't a fairy tale, graduating right into Mitacs. I actually worked for a year at the mall, selling jewelry. I was a jewelry salesman. And to be honest, I don't know if it's spin, but I managed to work that into my application of Mitacs, in that job gave me experience in talking to people to get them convinced to buy something, right? So it's like I'm trying to connect two worlds. And that's why I keep saying salesmanship is just something I wished I worked on earlier. So every little job, don't dismiss little jobs, don't make fun of little jobs that may seem little. There are skills to be learned in every job. And as long as you recognize it, then you will put it on your resume and be proud of it. And then it can get you to that career job. So every little step helps.
Thank you, Eric. And Rachel, any final piece of advice for today?
Usually the advice that I give is to volunteer for Let's Talk Science, or join Let's Talk Science at your local site. So you guys are already doing that, presumably. But I would encourage you, if you're enjoying working with Let's Talk Science, maybe volunteer for taking on more responsibilities, see if there's a site coordinator opportunity to open up. That would be maybe an interesting thing to try, to give yourself the opportunity to gain some more skills that would have that you'd be able to apply to your future career. And to echo what Bernadette and Eric were saying, there's twists and turns, and don't feel like you have to stay on the path you're on because you can't think of doing anything else. If you're not happy with what you're doing and you think that you could be happier doing something else, then it's okay to try new things and not feel like you're locked into one thing. There's lots of opportunities to try new things, and life is long, and I would encourage you to explore lots of different opportunities and take advantage of the opportunities that you have available to you now, because they're going to open so many more doors for you in the future.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. So that does look like everything we will have time for today. So I wanted to thank our panelists again for joining us and sharing their stories. This was a really great and inspiring discussion about all these different career paths and opportunities. I'd also like to thank everyone for tuning in today for the live broadcast. This video will be posted online after the event, and we'll be sharing the link to the video. So if you have any friends that weren't able to make it, or someone who's on the fence about volunteering with Let's Talk Science, please share this video with them. And you can access this video again yourself if you find you're looking for some career advice or some motivation. So thank you again to everyone, and please stay tuned for more professional development opportunities offered through Let's Talk Science. Thank you.